Many episodes on this channel show how a sustainable city design can deliver a better quality of life. In the last episode, we saw how design can cut a city's energy demand by at least 88%. That makes it a lot easier to switch to 100% renewable energy. Now the question is, can we actually produce all of that energy, some 450 kilowatt hours per person per month, within city limits? Welcome to Edenicity, Best Practices for Sustainably Abundant Cities. There are 7 main sources of renewable energy. In the United States, these produced a combined 13 quads or quadrillion BTUs of energy in 2022. That's more than enough to supply the housing, transportation, and commercial needs of the entire U.S. population on the Edenicity Plan. For the U.S. population today, 333 million people, the Edenicity Plan would require 6 quads per year. At 540 million people per year, our fair share of a peak world population of 10 billion people, Edenicity would need just under 10 quads per year. Remember, this is Edenicity Phase 1, that transitional period when we're actively upgrading cities to car-free, multifamily, mixed-use, food-secure, and energy-secure development. Phase 1 focuses on meeting consumer demand within the city. It does not include energy for industry or for air travel. We'll handle those in Phase 2 in a later episode. Let's survey each form of renewable energy. We'll look at how much energy they produce, how much land area they need, and how available they are in space and time. And because Edenicity is based on ecology, we'll pay special attention to the full function stack for each renewable. The function stack is all the different useful outputs a design element could provide, if we could position it to best advantage. It's not just what something does for us, it's also about how it relates to and provides value for the many other parts of our design. This is analogous to healthy ecosystems where every need is met in multiple ways, and every part of the ecosystem meets multiple needs. Here's an example from permaculture, the ecological design system behind Edenicity. In his courses, top permaculture designer Geoff Lawton points out that coffee is an understory plant. But most coffee is grown in full sun plantations. That doubles the yield, but it also requires intensive input of fertilizer and irrigation, and constant weeding. In a tropical food forest, coffee produces half as much per acre. But now you can grow other crops such as macadamia, jackfruit, guava, banana, and nitrogen-fixing fodder trees such as the cassia tree throughout the year on the same footprint. And that's just the food products. The cassia tree is also a prized hardwood. Many of these crops have a smaller yield than they would if grown alone, but the combined yields are far higher. A study in Vietnam found that the net income from this fuller function stack was almost 4 times more per hectare than plantation coffee. Lawton points out that the coffee in the understory requires no fertilizer, no weeding, and no irrigation because it's watered by condensation from the leaves in the overstory. The Vietnam study found that for this reason, the yields were more consistent year to year. Lawton adds that you should chop the tops off the coffee trees every 2 to 3 years. They'll stay manageable, mulch the forest floor, and live 60 years rather than the 20 they would live in full sun. Every living and non-living part of a design can benefit other parts. Knowing and matching these function stacks for each renewable energy resource helps us figure out where to put it in our land use plan. Let's start with the biggest renewable energy source. At nearly 5 quads, that would be biomass. Biomass energy products range from firewood to combustible grass, pellets to biofuels such as alcohol, biodiesel, and methane. Biomass comes from living organisms that naturally regenerate, so it is a renewable form of energy. Feedstocks include residues from agricultural crops or forestry, municipal waste, food waste, animal manure, and dedicated energy crops, including a wide variety of fast-growing annual and perennial grains, grasses, and trees. Because it's already a big industry, the technology is already mature and available. Biomass can have a rich function stack. In many cases, it already includes plantings that improve soil fertility and provide browse for grazing animals. Residues from alcohol production can also be used as organic fertilizer, or, in the case of brewers' spent grain or distillers' grains, as proteins and fat supplements in animal feed. But there's a catch. These residues are wet and they decompose rapidly, so they have a short shelf life. They're also heavy when wet, so they're not economical to transport more than 200 kilometers. Drying them for easy storage and transport costs a lot of energy. This means that if you want to use the full function stack of biofuels, you're looking at diseconomies of scale. That's why you need to produce biofuels close to where their sources and byproducts are used. Fortunately, the longest distance to the industrial zones in Edenicity is only about 20 kilometers, and it may be a lot less in the next design iteration. So, biomass energy is a natural match to Edenicity. In the US today, only 8% of biomass energy goes to electricity production. Nearly half of it goes directly to industry and 32% to transportation fuels. Edenicity's fully electric transportation system wouldn't use biofuels. In Phase 1, the heat generated by compost could help warm a greenhouse for season extension in cooler climates, and it also would provide a little extra CO2 to the crops to speed their growth. In Phase 2, biomass could provide some of the power needed for timber and food mills, as well as water treatment, as it often does today. The small stock of biofuels could also be maintained to fill gaps in other renewable energy sources, but that would require dedicated power stations. The real question is, how much biomass energy would be available within Edenicity city limits? In the US, biomass produces 370 kilowatt hours per person per month, but it draws from the massive timber reserves and cropland that make up half the country. The whole point of Edenicity is to shrink our land use by 96% so we can restore natural ecosystems and end the mass extinction. So the biomass energy available to Edenicity would be 4% of that 370 kilowatt hours per person per month, or around 15 kilowatt hours per person per month. But that's with status quo agriculture and forestry. According to a 2018 National Academy of Sciences article, the amount of living biomass in the world is half of what it once was due to human activity. The goal of Edenicity is to restore that missing half. So at the very least, the biomass available for energy should double in Edenicity. David Bloom, author of Alcohol Can Be a Gas, claims that a good permaculture design could boost biofuels production by a factor of at least 10. He and permaculture founder Bill Mollison have separately made the case for producing biofuels in several parts of the water quality function stack. Here's how. Early-stage wastewater treatment involves using anaerobic bacteria to digest the wastes. This produces methane. You could call it natural gas. The water that emerges from this still contains a lot of nutrients that could pollute a river. So first you need to run it through a bed of filtering plants such as cattails that can be used for biofuel. They use up the extra nutrient and it increases their growth by a factor of 3. Bloom's numbers give us about 150 kilowatt hours per person per month in biofuels. Working with my own numbers, I might believe something closer to 100 kilowatt hours per person per month. In either case, biofuels fall far short of the 450 kilowatt hours per person per month needed for Phase 1, and they're best used in heavy industry, which we're saving for Phase 2. So let's set aside biomass for now and look at the next largest renewable energy source. In the US, at nearly 4 quads, we're talking about wind. We're all familiar with the giant wind farms that are popping up in rural areas and offshore. These are as tall as possible because wind speed generally increases with altitude. I'm actually not very fond of these because in many cases the towers and the turbine blades use composite material that is hard to recycle. They also kill a lot of birds. One alternative that caught my eye is made by a company called Aeromine. Rather than put huge turbines on poles, Aeromine mounts a series of low-cost 3-meter 10-foot tall airfoils near the edge of flat building roofs. To save on parts and maintenance, the airfoils are locked in the direction of the prevailing wind. The airfoils create a low-pressure area between them that draws air up through an intake on the bottom. A small propeller in that intake turns a generator. The devices operate in all weather conditions and produce power at wind speeds as low as 9 kilometers an hour or 5 miles an hour. Because they are mounted on the edges of buildings, they can share roof space with solar panels. They also produce power at night and in cloudy or rainy weather. I like the inherently durable geometry of these devices, how easy they must be to install and service, and the fact that they don't have huge, non-recyclable, bird-bashing blades, though it might be necessary to put a coarse screen over the air intake on the bottom to keep the birds from going up through the propeller. Putting these on the roofs of residential buildings, commercial and industrial buildings, should bring in about 280 kilowatt hours per person per month. Not bad, but it still falls short of that 440 kilowatt hours per person per month that we need for Phase 1. And since we don't build out Edenicity's industrial sector until Phase 2, only the residential and commercial portion would be available to start. That comes to 120 kilowatt hours per person per month, and it will almost double when we add industrial roofs in Phase 2. Our next renewable, at just over 2 quads, is hydro. Actually, there are 2 forms of hydro, hydromechanical and hydrothermal energy. Let's start with the big one, hydromechanical. Water wheels or turbines turn the flow of a river or stream or creek into useful mechanical energy. Turbines in a dam convert the gravitational potential energy of water from a reservoir into mechanical energy. Usually these devices turn a generator, converting it into electrical energy. Rivers can be partially diverted through turbines without obstructing the entire flow with a dam. Everywhere except on seacoasts, trees are responsible for most of the condensation, either directly on their leaves or on the tree pollen and other organic particles that condense water in clouds. Trees help to store water in the soil. This buffers floods and droughts and recharges shallow aquifers. I actually first learned this in elementary school field trips to mountain forest reserves, where foresters explained how a layered tree canopy maintained our water supply. Trees also evaporate water. Therefore, the more trees, the faster the water cycle runs, and the more hydropower will be available. The design of Edenicity vastly increases tree cover within and beyond the city, so it will have more hydropower. With a big reservoir, hydromechanical power can be reliable and constant. In other cases, it will vary with the seasons and the rest of its function stack. For example, a reservoir may also serve as a recreation area, transportation waterway, and a fishery. Then the power available will depend on commerce and sports schedules as well as animal migrations. The U.S. produces about 170 kilowatt hours per person per month of hydropower, but only 3% of its 80,000 dams are set up for power. Only about 4% of these would be within Edenicity city limits. That's about 32 dams per city on average. If we put generators on all of them, Edenicity could generate about 220 kilowatt hours per person per month. That's with today's depleted water cycle, so it's actually a lower limit, but it's also an average. Some cities will be better suited for hydropower than others. Hydropower also comes in another, less familiar form, hydrothermal energy. This uses temperature differences between deep cold water and shallow warm water to run a heat engine. Ocean Thermal Energy Conversion, or OTEC, projects have been tested by Mackay Ocean Engineering in Hawaii since 1979. Mackay claims they can deliver energy for about 20 cents per kilowatt hour. That's no longer a competitive price, thanks to advances in other renewables. But unlike solar and wind, OTEC would offer a constant supply, and it can be adjusted up or down instantly with varying power supply or demand. But it's more efficient to use ocean thermal energy for direct cooling, especially in warmer climates. Air conditioning is already the biggest use of electricity in U.S. homes. Sydney, Australia has used saltwater air conditioning since the 1960s in its Circular Quay and Opera House. Mackay claims that seawater or deep-sea cooling can cut electricity use by 80%. These are big district cooling systems. Buildings on a district cooling loop would have simpler, cheaper, and probably more durable heat exchangers than air source units. In 2006, Mackay actually built a seawater air conditioning system for the Intercontinental Bora Bora Resort in French Polynesia. Smaller systems have been built in Hong Kong. OTEC and seawater cooling only work in areas with easy access to deep water, Pacific Islands and a small fraction of coastal areas around the world. For most cities, this won't be an option for an Edenicity upgrade. Because of its similarities to OTEC, I'll take one renewable out of sequence, geothermal energy, which produces just 0.2 quads per year in the United States. That's just 0.3% of the U.S. electricity supply. Compare that to Iceland, where geothermal supplies 30% of the energy. But in terms of total kilowatt hours per year, the U.S. is the biggest geothermal energy producer, followed by the Philippines and Indonesia. Geothermal plants use the heat of the Earth's crust at depth to produce steam, either from geysers at the surface or by drilling down several kilometers. The crust gets about 25 degrees Celsius or about 45 degrees Fahrenheit hotter per kilometer due to radioactive decay and heat left over from when the Earth formed. The steam goes through turbines that power an electric generator, or it can be used directly for district heating. The steam can come from natural sources or be injected and recirculated. Geothermal wells are costly to drill but cheap to operate for decades to come. The main problem with geothermal energy is that the boreholes can release greenhouse gases, usually in small amounts, but in isolated cases at the start of production, they can emit more CO2 than gas-fired power plants. Because of this, Edenicity won't routinely rely on geothermal power, except in rare instances such as Arctic regions with favorable geology. By the way, Shallow geothermal and hydrothermal heat exchange are alternatives to air source heat pumps for home heating and cooling. A pipe that goes down 100 meters or so into the earth or into a lake encounters mild temperatures that remain the same throughout the year. It costs a little less energy to exchange heat with mild temperature rock or water than extreme temperature air. These systems are a little pricier than air source systems, but it's possible that ground source or water source heat pumps may become more common as we get into Phase 2 construction. Let's talk about the renewable energy source you've probably been waiting for, solar electric power, which produces about 2 quads per year in the United States. Solar panels use the photovoltaic effect, where light knocks electrons loose in a semiconducting material. The electrons travel one way, the holes left behind go the other way. Both of these motions generate an electric current. Solar energy is available everywhere on Earth, but not equally. Northern Europe gets less than half as much usable sunlight as the global south. The real solar superpowers are Northern and Southern Africa, the Middle East, the Southwest in North America, and the southwest coast of South America. Here in Ohio, a solar panel gets about half the solar energy as it would in parts of the American Southwest. Solar power also varies a lot with time. No power at night, of course. Overcast skies cut power by 75%, rainy weather cuts it by 90%. Microclimate really matters. If clouds stack up on one side of a mountain, that side will have much worse solar power than the other side. Solar cells also lose efficiency over time, about 0.5% per year. Given these many limitations, why use solar power at all? Well, solar cells are cheap, easy, safe, reliable, non-polluting, and they require far less material than any other energy source, including nuclear. Here's what I mean. Tom Murphy's Do the Math blog has renderings of a house with cubes representing how much material you would need for a lifetime of energy from each source. Most energy sources, such as oil and uranium ore, loom large over the house. In contrast, the materials for a lifetime of solar energy come to just over 1 cubic meter. I mean, it's trivial by comparison. And 80 to 90% of the materials in solar cells are easy to recycle. The panels themselves are incredibly durable. They're rated for extreme weather and hail. They last 3 to 4 decades with little to no maintenance. You also can locate them close to where they're used, which reduces transmission losses. For these reasons, solar panel production has grown nearly 30-fold per decade. Solar cells use semiconducting technology in a high-demand industry, so it's no surprise that their cost performance follows an exponential track similar to computers. 59 years ago, Gordon Moore, who was later CEO of chipmaker Intel Corporation, observed that the number of transistors in integrated circuits was doubling every 2 years, a trend that has continued to the present day. In 1975, Moore's colleague, David House, introduced a corollary that computing performance should double every 18 months at no added cost. This is what's referred to as Moore's Law. Solar cell prices follow a path similar to Moore's Law. In the early 2000s, SunPower Corporation founder Richard Swanson observed that solar cell prices decline 20% every time the total number of cells manufactured doubles. In practice, Swanson's law means that solar cell prices have been falling about 75% per decade. Today, they're one of the cheapest available forms of power. Solar cells convert about 20% of the energy from sunlight into electricity. 25% is reflected, and the remaining 55% just heats the panel up. That can be a problem, because solar panels can lose up to 15% efficiency when they get hot. And hey, 55% is way bigger than 20%, so what if we just use the heat from sunlight rather than the electricity? Solar thermal technology is relatively mature, though solar water heaters only last about half as long as photovoltaics. But what if we could use both the electricity from solar panels and the heat? Over the years, there have been a few experiments to cool solar photovoltaics with water, then store the heated water for home use. This is a promising idea because it could more than triple the overall energy output from solar panels. But it's so new, we may not see it until deep into Edenicity Phase 2. Where would solar photovoltaics fit in Edenicity? Residential rooftops would be an obvious answer, but they're getting kind of crowded with gardens and wind generators. Still, I figured a 5-meter-wide row of panels could go along the poleward side of a building roofline. By poleward, I mean the north side of the building in the northern hemisphere and the south side in the southern hemisphere. This would allow full illumination in winter and provide partial shade for sensitive greens during the hottest months of the year. We won't see many industrial building roofs until Phase 2. But what about the bike path roofs? Bike path roofs? Yeah. In Eden City, the main bike paths between villages are sheltered for comfortable commuting year-round in all weather. Solar panels could go on the roofs of these shelters. I looked into sheltering all of the paths in the villages. Bad idea. The buildings would shade them out much of the year. Still, I could move the shelters higher, but then they would block the residents' view of the sky from their apartments. Oppressive. In the end, I put the panels on 2 main thoroughfares that crossed in the center of the villages. These would need wider setbacks to avoid shade from the buildings, but that makes sense for a commercial corridor. How much solar power would be available in Edenicity? In Ohio, which is near the low end of available sunlight in the U.S., I found that building roofs would provide 120 kilowatt hours per person per month, and bike paths about 50 kilowatt hours per person per month. So for Phase 1, solar energy would provide you with 170 kilowatt hours per person per month. In Phase 2, the industrial zones would give you another 170 kilowatt hours per month for a total of 340 kilowatt hours per month. These numbers would double in the American Southwest and in most of the Global South. Sure, most of these places might have a little less hydropower, but the gains in solar power more than offset the losses in hydro. Those are all of our renewables. Now the question is, can they provide the 440 kilowatt hours per person per month we'll need in Phase 1? Let's add up the energy available to Edenicity in Ohio. In Phase 1, we're not using biomass, and we only have residential roofs and bike path roofs for wind and solar power. But we still have all the energy we need for Phase 1. And their function stacks include shelter and garden microclimates, as well as the many ecological and recreational uses available with hydro. Phase 2 adds biomass and more than doubles wind and solar energy. The biomass comes with its own rich function stack, especially wastewater treatment. In the dry southwest states, sun is plentiful, but hydro may be scarce. So the energy picture might look more like this, a little less in Phase 1, a little more in Phase 2. The good news is the average Edenicity upgrade can provide all the renewable energy it needs within city limits, at least in Phase 1. We'll talk about Phase 2 in a later episode. But the bad news is wind and solar energy vary a lot throughout the day, season to season, and with the weather. Our need for energy varies too, of course, but it's not a perfect match. One way or another, we need sustainable ways to store energy and maybe also strategies to roll with those changes in supply. And we'll encounter some surprises along the way. For example, have you ever considered that a material like lead might be scarce? We'll talk about that and more in the next episode. Hey, since you're still here, it's pretty obvious that you actually enjoy going into excruciating detail about sustainability as an uplifting, abundant, large-scale design challenge. Not everybody does, and I appreciate it. I'm sure you've already subscribed so you don't miss any more of this. But go ahead and light up that like button. It does help to make these videos easier to find. Thanks so much. Take care, stay green, see you next time.